my channel, where nightmares are not just dreams, but real stories waiting to be told. Tonight, I bring you terrifying true stories. Stories that will make you question reality. Stories so disturbing they might just keep you up at night. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and whatever you do, don't look behind you.
I don't tell this story often because every time I do, I feel like I bring something back with me. But if I keep it inside, it festers. So here it is. Believe it or not, I don't care, but I need to say it. It happened when I was 25, working as a traveling contractor. I stayed in motels mostly, cheap places that didn't ask questions and barely changed the sheets. But in this particular town, there was only one option, a bed and breakfast, the kind where the owner lives on site and greets you with stale cookies and forced smiles. I arrived late, close to midnight. The owner, a frail old woman named Mrs. Holloway, barely looked at me as she handed me the key to room 6. "Last door on the left, dear. Breakfast at 7. I was exhausted. I barely glanced at the hallway as I trudged toward my room. The place smelled old, like damp wood and dust-covered memories. The hallway lighting was dim, flickering slightly. I noticed one thing as I passed the doors. Room 5 was missing. There was room 4, then an empty stretch of wall, then room 6 where I was staying. No door, no plaque, just nothing. That should have been my first warning. I didn't sleep well that night. The walls were thin, and I kept hearing soft noises, the creak of floorboards, faint rustling, and once, what sounded like whispering. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up suddenly, heart hammering. The room was dark, but something felt different. The air was heavy, like I wasn't alone. Then I heard it. A knock, not at my door, on the wall where room 5 should have been. I held my breath. 3 slow knocks. I sat up, pulse pounding. Maybe it was my imagination or the pipe settling. But then, a voice. Hello? It was muffled, barely a whisper, but definitely a man's voice. Is someone there? I don't know why, but I answered. Who's there? Silence. Then, after a long pause, I don't remember. I didn't sleep after that. Every instinct told me to leave, but I forced myself to stay. Maybe it was exhaustion or morbid curiosity, but I wanted to know who was behind that wall. Morning came and I practically ran to the front desk. Mrs. Holloway was there, stirring tea, looking as if she hadn't moved all night. I hesitated before speaking. Who's in room 5? Her stirring stopped. For a moment she didn't respond. Then, in a voice that sounded carefully neutral, she said, There is no room 5. I stared at her. There is no room 5. Her eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, daring me to argue. I left it alone. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake, waiting. And at 3:12 a.m., it happened again. 3 slow knocks, then the voice. I remember now. I clenched the sheets. The voice was clearer tonight, closer, right on the other side of the wall. He put me here. My breath hitched. Who? No answer. Just silence. Then, something new. Scratching. Long, slow scraping sounds against the wall, like fingernails dragging across the wood. I couldn't take it anymore. I leapt out of bed and pounded on the wall. Who put you there? Silence. Then, footsteps. Slow. Moving away from the wall. Then, my doorknob turned. I ran. I don't even remember grabbing my things. I just ran. I heard Mrs. Holloway calling after me as I left, but I didn't stop. I drove until I saw the sun rise, and I never looked back. Months later, I looked up the place, half expecting it to be gone, but the inn was still there, still in business. Then I found an old newspaper article. 30 years ago, a guest went missing from that very inn, a man named Daniel Whitaker. The article included a photo of the building, and in that photo, there was a room 5. I don't know what happened to Daniel. I don't know who or what was knocking on that wall. But I know one thing. Mrs. Holloway was lying. And I wasn't the only guest she'd tried to make forget.
Story number 2.
Chris was walking home late at night when his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Don't turn around." He froze. His breath hitched. The street behind him was empty. The only sound was the distant hum of streetlights. A prank? A mistake? Another buzz. "I know you saw me." A chill ran down his spine. He hadn't seen anything. But now, he felt it. Someone was watching. He picked up his pace, his heart pounding. His apartment was just 2 blocks away. He'd be safe there. Buzz. Another message. "You're walking faster. That won't help." Chris's hands trembled. He glanced at a passing shop window, trying to catch a reflection of the street behind him. His stomach dropped. There was a shadow, but it wasn't moving like him. It was closer. Chris sprinted into his building, slamming the door behind him. The lobby was empty. The elevator doors were open, waiting. He jumped inside, pressed his floor. "Buzz!" I took the stairs. His chest tightened. The doors closed. The elevator creaked upward, slow, agonizing. The floor numbers blinked. 3, 4, 5. Then it stopped. The doors slid open to a dark hallway. His hallway. Chris stepped out. The lights flickered. A shadow moved at the far end. Waiting. "Buzz. You left your door unlocked." His blood ran cold. He sprinted to his apartment, fumbling with his keys. The door creaked open. He slammed it shut, locking every bolt. Silence. He exhaled, his entire body shaking. He was safe. Then his phone buzzed one last time. His hands trembled as he lifted it. The final message made his stomach drop. "You should have turned around." Slowly, heart pounding, Chris looked up and saw the shadow standing right behind him. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just darkness, it had shape. Arms, legs, a head tilted unnaturally to the side. It was too tall, too thin. The room felt smaller. The air turned thick. Chris reached for the lamp, his fingers fumbling, desperate for light. The moment his fingers brushed the switch, his phone buzzed again. "Don't." He froze. The shadow didn't move. It didn't breathe. It didn't need to. Chris squeezed his eyes shut. Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe if he didn't look, it couldn't touch him. Maybe. A slow creaking sound. His closet door. Chris's pulse thundered. He had locked that door. He was sure of it. A whisper, soft as breath, slid through the room. Too late. His phone vibrated violently in his hands. He didn't want to look, but his fingers moved on their own. The screen flickered. The camera app was open. It showed a live feed of his room. Chris was in frame. So was the shadow. But this time, it was smiling. His breath hitched as his phone screen glitched. His reflection at the camera moved first. Chris hadn't moved, but his reflection had. It was turning toward him. Then, the lights went out. The next morning, Chris's apartment was silent. His bed was untouched, his phone sitting neatly on the nightstand. The only thing out of place was his mirror. The surface was cracked, and inside the glass, something was still smiling.
Story number 3.
It happened 6 years ago when I moved into my first apartment alone. It was cheap, too cheap for a place in the city. The landlord, a man in his 60s with deep lines on his face, handed me the key with a strange look in his eye. "You're in apartment 305, right?" he asked. I nodded. His fingers tightened around the key for just a second before letting go. "If anything seems off, just ignore it." I laughed it off at the time, figured he was just a weird old man. I should have listened. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. The place was small but cozy, and I was happy to finally have my own space. Then, one night, I woke up to a sound, a chair scraping against the floor. The sound came from the living room. My stomach twisted. I lived alone. Heart pounding, I crept out of bed and peeked around the corner. The chair at my kitchen table had moved. It wasn't dramatic, just a few inches from where I'd left it. But I knew I hadn't touched it. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd bumped it earlier and just hadn't noticed. Maybe the floor was uneven. Maybe tap, tap, tap. A soft knocking sound from inside my closet. I didn't check. I wanted to, but every part of my brain screamed no. Instead, I grabbed my blankets, went back to bed, and pretended I hadn't heard anything. That became a pattern. The chair kept moving. The closet knocking continued. Every time I ignored it, it got worse. One night, I woke up to the feeling of someone watching me. I turned over, half asleep, and for a split second, I swear, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. Then it was gone. I stopped sleeping with the lights off after that. A month in, I finally snapped. I was watching TV when I heard the knocking from my closet again. Not soft this time, hard, insistent. I stormed over and yanked the door open. Empty, just my clothes, my shoes, the boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. Then I saw it, a single shoe print, not mine. It was in the dust on the closet floor, pointed toward the door, like someone had been standing there, waiting. I confronted my landlord the next day. I expected him to laugh or tell me I was imagining things. Instead, his face fell. "You weren't supposed to open the closet." He sighed and rubbed a hand over his face. The last tenant, he was a quiet guy, kept to himself. Then one day, he just disappeared. Left all his stuff behind. No note, no sign of struggle. Just gone. "Did he live in 305? I asked, already knowing the answer. The landlord nodded. "I moved out that weekend. I never found out what happened to the last tenant. But sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear it again. Tap, tap, tap."
Okay, you made it. But are you sure you are alone? Shadows stretch long in the dark, and sometimes things watch from the corners. If you enjoy the stories, make sure to subscribe my channel before it's too late. Leave a comment below if you are there, but remember, some stories should never be told. I hope I'll see you very soon.